Welcome back, everyone. Today's story takes us deep into the wild frontiers of old America, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and destiny. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's get started. The Arizona sun was merciless that afternoon, pouring molten light across the barren mesas and red-dusted plains. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the dry scent of sage and gunpowder from faraway skirmishes. Dust rose behind a lone rider, a cowboy named Luke Carson, whose weathered face spoke of years spent chasing cattle and ghosts across the frontier. He wasn't a hero by choice. The land had made him one out of necessity. A man who'd seen too many friends fall to greed, bullets, or whiskey. Luke rode for no one now but his own peace of mind. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Clementine, carried him through the twisting canyon trails where silence ruled. Luke had been tracking a lost steer since dawn, but what he found instead would change his life forever. A faint cry pierced the stillness, a sound so soft it could have been the wind. He pulled the reins, listening again. There it was, a child's voice, followed by the harsh laughter of men. The cowboy's jaw tightened. Trouble had a sound of its own, and this one was close. He kicked his spurs, urging Clementine toward the echo. As he rounded a narrow bend, Luke spotted movement in the shadowed ravine below. 3 outlaws, rough-looking drifters with rifles slung over their shoulders, surrounded 2 young Apache girls. Their hands were bound, and fear filled their dark eyes. The men taunted them, arguing in low voices about what to do next. Luke's heart pounded. He'd seen this kind of cruelty before. Men who preyed on the helpless for sport. He slid off his horse and crouched behind a cluster of rocks, assessing the ground like a soldier preparing for war. The odds were bad, 3 guns against 1, but walking away wasn't in his nature. Luke unholstered his Colt revolver, the metal glinting beneath the sun. He took a slow breath, steadying his aim. The first shot cracked through the air like lightning. The nearest outlaw dropped instantly, his rifle clattering against the stones. The others shouted, spinning toward the sound. Luke moved fast, firing again, ducking behind cover as bullets screamed past him. One grazed his sleeve, another splintered a rock inches from his face. His pulse thundered, but his hands stayed steady. He rose, fired once more, and a second outlaw fell backward into the dust. The last man cursed and ran for his horse, dragging one of the girls as a shield. Luke fired, hitting him square in the shoulder. The man staggered, then fled, limping into the desert, leaving his captives behind. For a moment, all that remained was the sharp smell of gunpowder and the heavy sound of Luke's breathing. He holstered his revolver, clutching his bleeding arm where a bullet had grazed him. The girls stared at him in silence, trembling. Luke removed his hat, kneeling to meet their eyes. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you again." They spoke little English, but they understood enough. One of them pointed toward the distant mountains and murmured, "Home." Luke nodded. He helped free their wrists, his fingers gentle despite the blood seeping from his wound. Clementine had bolted at the sound of gunfire, so he gathered what supplies he could from the fallen men and motioned for the sisters to lead the way. The desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in gold and shadow. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his arm, yet he pressed on, guided by instinct and duty rather than hope. As twilight deepened, the trio moved through dry creek beds and narrow passes where the wind howled like ghosts. The girls, though frightened, showed remarkable resilience. They walked barefoot over the stones without complaint, whispering prayers in their native tongue. Luke admired their courage. He'd fought men twice their size who showed less strength. By the time the first stars appeared, they reached a plateau overlooking a hidden valley. Smoke curled from distant fires, a village nestled between the cliffs. The older girl's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Home," she whispered again, smiling faintly through exhaustion. Luke exhaled, feeling his strength fade. The bullet wound had stopped bleeding, but infection was a real danger in the desert. He knew he'd never make it back to town without help. Still, he kept his voice calm. "Go on," he told the girls. "Your people will take care of you now." But they refused to leave him behind. The younger one, barely 10, tugged at his sleeve and motioned for him to follow. He smiled weakly. "All right then," he muttered, forcing himself to stand. With the last of his strength, he followed them down the rocky trail into the valley below. As they neared the camp, torches flared along the perimeter. Apache warriors emerged from the shadows, bows drawn and eyes burning with suspicion. Luke raised his hands, his revolver still holstered. The girls ran ahead, shouting in their language, and threw themselves into the arms of a tall, imposing man who stepped forward from the largest tent. His hair was streaked with gray, his gaze sharp as flint. This was the chief, the father of the girls. The moment he saw Luke, his expression hardened. In these lands, a white man's presence often meant danger. The warriors surrounded him instantly, forming a circle of drawn arrows and tense silence. Luke didn't resist. He was too weak to fight, and he had no reason to. He simply stood there, bleeding into the dirt, as the girls spoke rapidly to their father, gesturing toward him and the canyon beyond. Their voices rose with emotion, and slowly the chief's gaze shifted. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the cowboy's wound and the sincerity in his face. Luke could barely stay upright, but he met the chief's stare without fear. "They're safe," he managed to say. "That's all that matters." For a long time, no one moved. The firelight flickered across the camp, illuminating faces filled with both anger and curiosity. Then the chief gave a single command in Apache, and the warriors lowered their weapons. The tension broke like a storm giving way to calm. Luke felt his knees buckle as darkness crept into his vision. The last thing he saw before collapsing was the chief's hand catching his shoulder to keep him from falling face first into the dirt. Somewhere in the distance, a drum began to beat, low and steady, as if marking the rhythm of his fading heartbeat. When Luke awoke hours later, he was lying inside a warm tent, his arm wrapped in soft linen and herbs that smelled of earth and pine. The younger of the two sisters sat beside him, watching silently. Outside, he could hear voices and the crackle of fire. Pain still throbbed through his body, but the air was peaceful, heavy with the scent of smoke and wildflowers. For the first time in years, Luke didn't feel alone. He had crossed a line most men feared to tread, into Apache territory. But fate, it seemed, had brought him here for a reason he could not yet understand. When Luke opened his eyes again, dawn light was spilling through the cracks of the tent. His arm throbbed, but the fever had passed. He could smell wood smoke, hear the murmurs of the waking village, and the distant laughter of children. The two sisters he had rescued were outside, helping gather water. He watched them for a moment, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It had been a long time since he'd seen a place that felt alive, not just surviving, but belonging to the land itself. This camp wasn't a settlement, it was a heartbeat in the desert. A young warrior entered with a bowl of broth and a calm but watchful gaze. He didn't speak English, yet his gestures told Luke everything. Eat, rest, you're being watched. Luke obeyed, his stomach grateful for the warmth. After the warrior left, the tent flap opened again, this time revealing the tall figure of Chief Nantan. His presence filled the small space, his silence heavier than words. He studied Luke for a long moment, his face unreadable. "You are awake," he finally said, his voice deep and deliberate. "My daughters tell me you fought to save them." Luke nodded slowly. "I reckon I just did what any man should." His tone was steady, respectful, but he could sense the weight of judgment in the chief's eyes. Nantan stepped closer, crouching beside him. "Many white men say that," the chief replied, "but I have buried too many of my people to believe easily." The words cut deep, but Luke didn't argue. He knew the history, the broken promises, the blood spilled over land and pride. He wasn't here to defend his kind. He had done what was right, and that was enough for him. The chief watched him in silence before finally rising. "Your wound will heal," he said. "Until then, you will stay here. My people will not harm you, if you bring no harm to us." Luke nodded again, understanding the unspoken warning. When the chief left, Luke felt the weight of the desert settle back over him. Days passed, each one marked by quiet observation and slow healing. He helped where he could, fixing tools, mending a saddle, teaching a few of the younger boys how to calm nervous horses. Bit by bit, the tribe's suspicion softened into cautious respect. The Apache camp was a world apart from anything Luke had known. At sunrise, the women gathered berries and herbs, The men rode out to hunt or patrol the ridges. Children played near the stream, their laughter echoing through the canyon like music. Every action had purpose, every ritual a rhythm that connected them to the earth. Luke found himself drawn into that rhythm. The younger of the two sisters, Naiche, often brought him food and tried to teach him their words. He'd repeat them with a grin, his accent clumsy but sincere, and she'd laugh until her eyes sparkled. At night, the campfires glowed like stars fallen to earth. The tribe sang songs of old wars and sacred spirits, voices rising and falling with the wind. Luke would sit nearby, silent, listening to the stories carried in their melodies. He realized that these people weren't the savages so many settlers claimed. They were guardians of a way of life far older than his own. Yet, even as peace settled around him, he knew his presence was temporary. A white cowboy could not stay among them forever, no matter how deep the bond that had begun to form. One evening, Chief Nantan invited Luke to share a meal with the elders. It was an honor rarely offered to outsiders. The chief spoke little during the meal, but when the fire burned low, he turned to Luke and asked, "Why did you not ride away when you saw danger in the canyon?" Luke took a moment before answering. "Because they were children," he said simply. Didn't matter whose children they were. Wrong's wrong. The chief nodded slowly, eyes reflecting the firelight. "You speak with truth," he said. Many men carry guns, few carry honor. Over the next days, the bond between them grew in quiet ways. Luke helped mend the corral fence, taught some of the younger hunters to ride without fear, and shared stories from his wandering years. Tales of cattle drives, dust storms, and lonely nights on the trail. The tribe listened, curious about the life beyond their canyon. In return, the chief told him about the spirits of the land, how the mountains were the bones of ancient warriors and the rivers their flowing blood. Luke found wisdom in those words, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years, but the peace was fragile. One afternoon, a scout returned with grim news. A band of armed settlers had been seen riding near the river, claiming the Apache had stolen horses. The chief called his warriors to prepare, their faces grim, but determined. Luke knew what was coming, another senseless clash born of fear and misunderstanding. He stepped forward, offering what help he could. "If they're looking for trouble," he said, "maybe I can talk them down before it starts." The chief looked at him for a long moment. "Would you risk your life again, this time for us?" Luke didn't hesitate. "I already did once," he said. "Guess one more time won't hurt." The next morning, he rode out with 2 Apache scouts to meet the settlers. The air was tense, the horizon trembling with heat. When the two sides faced each other, hands hovered near triggers. Luke rode between them, hat low, voice steady. He spoke of truth, of the girls he'd saved, of peace earned through honor, not bullets. Slowly, suspicion gave way to reason. After hours of talk and tension, the settlers turned back, muttering but unharmed. For once, blood had not stained the sand. When Luke returned, the tribe greeted him in silence at first, then with quiet nods of respect. Chief Nantan approached, his face unreadable, and held out something wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a single eagle feather, carved with intricate markings. "This belongs to a man who has faced death twice and chose life both times," the chief said. "You are not Apache by blood, but you are Apache in spirit." Luke accepted it, humbled beyond words. The feather was more than a gift. It was a promise, a symbol of trust that few men had ever earned. That night, as he sat by the fire, Luke looked around the camp, the people who had once feared him, now smiling and singing under the stars. He felt something he hadn't in years, peace. The next morning he saddled Clementine, ready to return to his wandering life. The chief and his daughters stood waiting. "The world beyond these mountains is cruel," Nantan said. "But wherever you ride, this feather will remind you. You have a home here." Luke nodded, tying the feather to his hatband. Then, with the rising sun at his back, he rode away into the vast golden silence. As the distance swallowed him, the wind caught the feather, making it dance above his head like a spirit in flight. Somewhere behind him, the tribe watched until he vanished beyond the horizon. The cowboy who had risked everything not for glory, not for gold, but for the simple truth that courage and kindness could still change a man's fate forever.